Okay, well, I want to thank you all, first of all, allowing me to be here today and inviting me to be part of your meeting. I don't know if any of my background was shared with you all, so I would just briefly say that I didn't come by these gray hairs naturally. They came from being in the nonprofit world, and they came early from being in the nonprofit world, so I hope you all can appreciate that. My background really was in working in the nonprofit world and starting nonprofits and trying to help them get turned around financially. And I think that's usually the plight of most nonprofits. They're either on solid footing or they're struggling to, especially these days, keep your doors open and all those sorts of things. So it's a pleasure to talk to you about the role of boards, and I'm glad both board members and directors and other personnel are on the call, because we often use terms so lightly, like, it takes a village or it takes a team, but to have a successful nonprofit, you have to have a successful team, and that's the director, the board, and the staff and volunteers. So I'll try to cover a lot of material today. And Michelle, if you know me, I always tell folks I'm like a vaudeville show. So if I'm going over, do the virtual hook and tell me I have to stop. So let me just start by saying, let's just kind of start at the beginning. And one of the things I want to acknowledge up front is, if there's one conversation that people don't like having about nonprofits, it's like, what is a board and the role of the board? It's kind of like the voice from the Peanuts cartoons when the adults talk and all you hear is wah, wah, wah. That's kind of like, oh, that's what talking about board and board development is going to be like wah, wah, wah. So I will try not to make it that way. I'll try to make it exciting and vibrant and a living organism, so you can see how important that part of the team is, and that team recognizes how important they are to that organization. So let me just start at the beginning in terms of, let's say you are trying to start a nonprofit, or you're very early on in having a nonprofit, and or you're struggling as a nonprofit and need to figure out sort of where to go and how to go and what that has to do with the board of directors. So I tell people, in any phase of development in a nonprofit, there are 4 foundational bricks that you need. So if you visualize a building, you need to have 4 bricks lined up so you have a solid foundation to build from. And that first brick you need to have there is your mission statement. You need to have a vision statement. You need to have bylaws, and you need to have a long-range plan. And those are all things that people are like, oh yeah, let's put this mission statement together, a vision statement, and the bylaws. But if those are not well thought out components of that foundation, you're going to go astray pretty quickly. If you don't know what your mission truly is and your vision truly is, you can't really have a long-range plan, and the bylaws aren't going to help guide you at that point. So when people want to start nonprofits, one of the first things they do is they just start throwing these documents together, and they get into the operation of the organization, and they find out that they are really off course. So if I can just encourage you and be a little off topic right at the beginning, and you'll see in a moment how that's going to fit back together into a role of board of directors, that those are the 4 foundational blocks you've got to have: is a clear mission statement and a clear vision statement. And just one thing I want to say about mission statements, and this is my soapbox: people write these dissertations that are mission statements. And if I asked any of you right now to raise your hand, and without looking around your office, could you recite for me verbatim your agency mission statement? Can anybody show me that with a show of hands, or reply to Michelle and let her know? Could you recite your mission statement? Because I'll tell you how they usually go. Okay, I see Rick raising his hand. He can cite his vision or mission statement, but they're usually like these paragraphs like, we're here to save the world, and all the world's a beautiful thing, and it goes on. And by the time you get through, if you had to do that 1-minute elevator speech, you've lost that person. So, think about things like, the Marines, when they say the few, the proud, the Marines, like everybody can recite that. Okay. So if you don't have that in place, take a moment with your board of directors and go back and rewrite that and make it something pithy and concise and meaningful and something you can say at the drop of a hat. The other thing I would say about building that strong foundation, that other component, are your bylaws. And a lot of people, when they're putting organizations together, and this would be the role of the board because they're the first people on the scene when you're putting an organization together, is they write bylaws and they'll go on Google and find somebody else's bylaws and do a lot of copy and paste. In some ways that's fine to get started that way, but bylaws are, again, I'm going to go back to the term a living organism, and they need to be looked at all the time, and they need to be updated, and they need to be revised, and they need to be followed. If you're holding a board meeting and somebody doesn't have a copy of the bylaws in front of them, I would encourage you to make that a standard practice, because all sorts of things start happening in the operation of a nonprofit. And when somebody else from the outside comes back and starts looking at things, it's like, well, you all made a decision about purchasing something and that wasn't in alignment with your bylaws. Or somebody was brought on the board and they were brought on improperly, or somebody acted in a particular way that was not in line with your bylaws. And again, I know it's a wah, like who wants to sit and look at a bunch of bylaws? Boring, but that is your roadmap. So if your bylaws are not timely and current, you need to sit down and revise those. And if you don't want to do it yourself, ask somebody to come in and help you do that as a third party or as a consultant, or somebody to come in and do that. Some of the other things initially that have to take place are, completing and submitting state filings, whether that's for, your federal 501 or your state nonprofit status. Those types of things initially have to be put in place and as part of your foundation. And then in the absence of the ability to have paid staff, that's what your board is doing, is taking on the day-to-day operations of the organization when there are not funds to have paid staff. And again, I'm going to talk about that in a minute, because that gets murky as organizations start developing and board members have to shift from being staff to being board members. Sometimes those roles get confused and things break down when that happens. And then again, the last piece of that strong foundation is a long-range plan. And if there's anything that makes people run from a room, it's saying we need a long-range plan. And it's because somebody's got the impression this is going to be a 600-page document. It's going to end up on a shelf and we're never going to do anything with it. And that is the worst way to look at developing a long-range plan. So, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But again, just to get started, those are the 4 building blocks that you need. So if you're a board member right now and you're sitting here listening to me and you say we don't have those 4 blocks, think about how you're going to get those 4 blocks in place, because you need that foundation. Okay, it's like the scriptural reference about building a house on solid ground and not on sand. So if you don't have those 4 foundations, you're building your house on sand, and you don't want to do that. So looking at the ongoing, well, let me stop for a minute. Anybody have any questions so far? I'm happy to be interrupted and answer questions. Anybody have questions? If so, Michelle, can you see those? I'll be happy to answer those right now if anything pops up. Okay, if not, I'll keep plugging along then.
So, Tammy,
I can't hear you.
One of the things.
What, Michelle?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
So I think one of the things is, one of these conversations that you started to touch on was what seems like you were probably discussing more of a working board. And so I think knowing how a board interacts with the executive director and what those roles are and how those roles are defined and interact together would be my question. What are the activities that a board does, and when are those activities really coming up against the line on what the executive director is supposed to be doing? And I know those are sometimes laid out in other documents, but is there a general statement that these are what the board of directors are supposed to be doing? These are the functions of a board, and unless certain circumstances where maybe there's no paid staff, that might change, but generally, what is their role?
Yeah. All right. So I'm going to start enumerating those. All right. So the basic role of a board is to ensure compliance, and compliance with the following. They need to ensure that there's compliance with your mission statement Again, that's why I mentioned that early on. If your mission statement isn't what it should be, the board needs to get that corrected along with the ED. They need to ensure that there's compliance with the vision statement. They need to ensure there's compliance with the bylaws. And again, if none of those things are in order, it's their job to get those revised. And again, I'm going to jump way ahead because the reason why I keep stressing the importance of those bylaws is sometimes organizations will merge with somebody else, or they may need to be dissolved. And within those bylaws, there will be provisions for making that happen. So you need to make sure your bylaws are timely, and it's the board's job to do that. The board's other job is to develop policy. And I need to be real clear about what policy means. Policy means things like procurement policies, clear instructions about how things get purchased at the agency. Okay, now I've worked in a lot of nonprofits, and I can tell you the range of how that gets played out. It can be everything from, well, when the other lady used to be here, she used to just run to Walmart and buy whatever we needed, and then she'd give the receipt to the board president and he'd write a personal check back to her, and then when the agency had money, they'd reimburse the board president. Does that sound familiar to anybody on the call? Okay.
Yeah, does this happen in your organization?
Pardon?
Does this happen in your organizations? Is that kind of the process of how things happen?
It is the practice and how things work in some nonprofits. And then there are other nonprofits that have very formalized processes about how procurement takes place. But again, I'm back to, it's the board's responsibility to write that policy so it's clear. So if you purchase something that's, a $500 item, but your board had written a policy that said the executive director can't purchase anything that's $500 or more, you're in violation of that procurement policy. So again, it's very important that they're setting policies and writing them so everybody knows where they stand. It's their job to write conflict of interest policies, and it's their job to follow them. It's their job to write hiring and termination policies. It's their job to write things like healthcare coverage and staff benefit policies. It's their job to write internal financial control policies. Okay. They're also responsible for overseeing the financial health of the operation, such as approving budgets and monitoring the compliance with the budget, participating in fundraising. And this is a slippery slope. I could spend a whole day talking about just this one item and the role of a board, because the board is responsible for the financial health of the organization. They play a critical role in that. And often what board members think when they come on a board is that, well, I'm here donating my time, and that's my contribution to making sure the agency is, solvent. I'm giving up my valuable time. And that is true. And nonprofits need your valuable time. But most nonprofits these days particularly will have what they call a give or get policy. That when you come on a board, you're expected to give so much money or get so much money, and or both, to give and get money. And again, your board should be setting up a clear enough board recruitment policy for new members that when a new member is asked to join, they understand what their financial obligation to the agency will be to give or get. Does that make sense, everyone? Yeah, and that's a slippery slope for an executive director if the board hasn't set up that policy. So if a new board member is brought on and they leave it up to the executive director to have that conversation with that new board member, it really isn't the best approach. That is something that board member should have said to that recruit during the time they were recruiting them, that there would be an expectation of a financial gift. And if there is a set amount of what that expectation is, that needs to be clearly explained to that new board member, that potential recruitment of that board member. It's also their job to ensure compliance with regulatory bodies like the IRS, state and local organizations, zoning laws, or whatever may interact with your organization. It's their job to assist with public relations and organizational outreach. It's the role of the board to introduce the executive director to leaders in the community. Again, that's back to helping them grow the organization and keep it financially stable, and to help you find new board members. That's a great way to find new board members. It's also their job to, along with the executive director, to write that and develop that long-range plan and then ensure compliance with it. And long-range plans take place with, community members, staff, etc. So the long-range plan is a critical part of that board's role. It is their job to recruit and replace and terminate the executive director. Okay. It is their job to recruit, replace, and terminate other board members if that should happen. It's their responsibility to have a clear recruitment plan for other board members and a training and orientation for those individuals, and to help keep the board as diversified as possible. And I cannot emphasize this enough. My current role right now is I work at John A. Logan College. I'm in charge of the grant department here. And I cannot tell you how many times when we go out looking for external funding, that one of the first things that funder is asking us about is the diversity of our board. And diversity, to all of us who were born in Southern Illinois, doesn't mean that we have somebody from Anna, but we also have somebody from Mount Vernon. That's not diversity, okay? They're looking for ethnic diversity, they're looking for racial diversity, and it's going to start being a line in the sand, if you will, for funders around whether they're going to let you move forward with a funding application if you don't have a diverse board. So that's a very important job for your board of directors, is to make sure that your board is diverse and that you start growing diversity on your board. Again, the last thing that I'll talk about quickly is just, it is again their job to hire, supervise, and meet regularly with the executive director. If I see one thing that happens so many times in nonprofits, it's that a board hires an executive director and then they kind of disappear until the monthly board meetings. And then if there's an issue, there hasn't been appropriate ongoing communication with that executive director during their employment for that executive director to sometimes even know if there was a problem. So it's very important that whoever on that board is the contact person for that executive director, that they're meeting with them regularly and they're staying in communication with each other. And in the interest of time, I'll just quickly say one of the most important things about the role of the board is what their job is not. And here is what is not their job. The board is not to be involved in the day-to-day operations of the agency. And this gets very murky, as I said earlier, when a board has started out as the non-paid employees because they didn't have funds to hire somebody, so they've had to act in the role of the direct service provider. And then when funds come available, they have to step out of that role and become board members and let that director run that agency. So sometimes they still want to come and be involved in day-to-day operations, and it's inappropriate, and that's a conflict of interest. So it's always easy to say this isn't what you shouldn't do, and they shouldn't be involved in day-to-day. But their big overarching responsibility is to make sure there's policy and compliance, that is their role, is to oversee policy and compliance. So I know I'm giving you a lot of information in a short amount of time. And like I said, any one of these things we could sit and discuss for hours. But I want to be able to allow time for you all to ask questions, because your nonprofits are all different. Some of you are in nonprofits that have been around for a long time. Some of you are in nonprofits that might be struggling. Some of you are in nonprofits with solid boards. Some of you are struggling to find board members. So is it okay, Michelle, if we spend some time just with some questions?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think I've allowed everyone to unmute yourself. So if you have a question, go ahead and do that, or you can put it in the chat. One thing that I want to so the reason that Tammy and I know each other is, my office with another organization was at Johnny Logan College, and so I was familiar with the work that she was doing. But I had a lot of questions for her as a new executive director on what the role of the board was and what my role was, and how were they different, how were they the same, what kind of things were we supposed to do. And so, if we're looking at the questions that I sent out on the agenda, one of them is, do your board members know what their role is? And if you answer no to that question, so if you've heard everything that Tammy has said and your answer is no, then what are the next steps for that? I know personally I've invited you to a board retreat, and we've had this conversation with the board during a retreat where we were able to discuss lots of other things, but that we really honed in on what their role is. But for everyone else, what's a good way to address this issue if we've learned what their role is and is not, and it's not what's happening in the organization? What's the best manner to have that discussion?
Yeah, and again, I always appreciate the role the director is in. And I told this to Michelle early on. There are things that, like, if you ask someone like me to come in and talk to your board, there are things that I can say as an outside person that an executive director may have a harder time saying, or being heard, just because of that relationship as an employee and an outside person is not. But this is one of those things that I find a lot of nonprofits don't have, and that is a clear job description for their board. And that's why I, again, spoke briefly, but about the importance of having like a board packet, that when you go out to recruit someone, or if you have a board right now and you're trying to, again, put your foundation building blocks together, it's one of the things that I would strongly encourage you to do, which is think about putting together a 1 or 2 page packet. Again, you don't want to give them a 30-page document, but a 1 or 2 page packet that says, here's what the role of the board is. Here are expectations of you, whether it's to, again, in compliance with your bylaws, we meet monthly, we have an annual board retreat, you'll be expected to serve on a committee, whatever that is. Give that to that person ahead of time so they clearly know what they are committing to. Or if they don't want to commit to that, maybe they can't commit to a once a month meeting. And so, but you're desperate to fill that 5th seat because your bylaws say you have to have 5 people. So you'll take anybody to fill that 5th seat. And then you can't conduct formal business because your bylaws say all 5 people have to be present and they weren't. So now you can't conduct business because that person can't commit to meeting once a month. So put together a job description for them so they understand what will be expected of them. It's just like when you come on board as an executive director, if you don't have a clear job description, how do you know what you are or are not supposed to be doing? And I know there's always that last item that says other duties as assigned, and that's what most of us do as executive directors, is other duties as assigned. But it at least gives us some place to start to know what they expect of us. So likewise, they should know what to expect of each other as board members and what their role will be. So put a job description together for them or create one.
Great, thank you. Tammy, we have a question from Joni, and she says, do you have suggestions for successful executive director searches?
Yeah, I think, again, it's back to your mission and vision statement. And I know, again, those are the boring things in nonprofit world to talk about because we're all passionate about the work, right? Whether it's kids or the elderly or, hospice or whatever we're doing, we're so passionate about that. But it's hard to recruit a director if you really don't understand what your mission and your vision is and where you want to take that. Let me give you an example of that. It's like in the nonprofit world, often what happens is this: the executive director leaves and the board looks around and says, well, Sally's been here the longest. Let's just make her the executive director. She knows where everything is. She knows where the files are. She knows how to get the oil changed at the Valvoline place. Like Sally can be the director. That's how it happens a lot in the nonprofit world. And somebody raise your hand and tell me that's not what happens, okay? Because that's what happens. Sally never wanted to be the executive director, but she doesn't want to let down the kids that you're serving, so she takes on that job. Not a good plan, okay? So the best way to start to look for a director is to know, who are we and what are we trying to do? Like, where are we now, but where are we trying to go? And I keep harping about those foundational blocks, but if you have those blocks, it helps you keep answering those questions like, well, our long range plan is to grow the agency from working with just, 20 dogs in the shelter. We want to be able to have 50 dogs in the shelter. Well, somebody you're recruiting needs to know that, because they need to know whether they are up for that challenge and if the board is going to be there to support them in that process. The other thing I would say when you're looking for an executive director, again, is to see what kind of leadership style they have. If your board is the type that likes a visionary leader, somebody who's like going to basically help them write that plan and say, hey, this is where, look, we can go here and I'm going to show you how we can do that. If that's the type of person you need, then know that that's the type of person you need in the gap you're trying to fill. So you have to know what kind of leadership style you're looking for also. Does that help, Joni, or do you have follow-up questions about that? Oh, you're muted, Joni. Can you unmute her?
Okay, now
there you go.
Thank you. Those were helpful. In this community, LinkedIn or word of mouth or like getting the word out are avenues. But I'm curious what the best background. I know we have an MPA program at SIU. Some of those graduates are ideally suited, but the board I am on is struggling to find a suitable executive director, and it's become a real, it's created some inappropriate overlap, and everybody's doing their best, and it hasn't created problems yet. But right. we really need the best, most effective executive director search that we can put together.
Sure. And, there are, again, I don't know what the agency is that you work with. Do you mind telling me?
Certainly. It's the Jackson County Growth Alliance. It's a regional economic development board for the county.
Okay.
So the areas outside the city of Carbondale and the city of Murfreesboro, it's basically the unincorporated area of Jackson County.
Sure. Again, I know it sounds like I'm beating a dead horse here, but I am, but it's like, are you comfortable with your mission statement, and are you comfortable with your vision statement? Because those are the first things that are going to guide you as to, again, who you're looking for. And again, I'm just going to keep going back to this. You have to know where you are and where you're trying to go. Now, knowing those things and having those foundation blocks in place will help you go look at, like, Washington University in St. Louis has a wonderful social work program that has a specialty in social and economic development. Reach out to them. They may have, they have a department where you're going to be able to talk about recent graduates or former graduates, or connect with the Alumni Association there. There's another list, a hiring place called Ideal List, IDEALIST, that has both national and international jobs. It is a great place to find board members, volunteers, and advertise for staff. I really like that site as opposed to just the local ones as well. But I would try those things, but I would start reaching out to some of my schools of social work in the area, University of Illinois, SIU, because again, my hunch in a setting like that is, gosh, it's good to hire somebody who really knows the area, because you don't have time for them to figure out on the map where Ava is if they don't know where, Ava is. And has someone who's passionate about that. But it doesn't exclude, if you will, an outsider from taking that. But a really strong executive director is sizing you up during that interview as well, right? And so they're trying to find out, do these people want a warm body just so they can stop handling the day-to-day things? Or do they really know what they want and where they're trying to go? And that's how you're going to find the best director.
Very insightful and helpful. And I will look into the ideal list. And we had actually discussed reaching out to the MBA program here at SIU or SIUE and perhaps WashU.
Yeah.
Thank
I would
you.
check with all of those.
Thank you.
All right. Other questions that you all might have that would be helpful to you all?
I have another question. What role can you elaborate a little bit more on what the board's role is in grant writing or fundraising?
Yeah, the fundraising is always my favorite. And here's where you'll hear my preaching about events. I personally hate special events. So I'm just going to tell you that is my bias. That is my bias up front. And I'll tell you why. Boards will come to you and say, I think we should have a fill in the blank golf tournament. I think we should have a, hot dog pizza day at Walmart. And when I was a young executive director, I was like, okay, I can do that. And then as I got more seasoned, I was like, how much money do you expect that we're going to raise? Well, I think we could probably raise $3,000 or $4,000. Okay, how much money and staff time is it going to take to develop that event to raise the $3,000 or $4,000? Because I'm probably going to spend $6,000 in staff time and resources trying to raise $4,000. And your job as a board member is just to tell me who that one donor is in the community who can write me a check for $4,000. Okay, so fundraising and boards, when they talk about special events, I'm like, unless you all as the board want to take on running the golf tournament, let's not have a golf tournament. It is a poor use of my time. And when I'm running around trying to get whole sponsorships, there are 4 clients that I didn't get to take care of because I was busy trying to get whole sponsorships. Okay, so I'm not a big fan of events. Now, there are people who hold events who will raise, $100,000, $200,000. That's great. But they are also putting in countless hours to raise that money. And that becomes more of a public relations thing than necessarily a financial benefit to the organization. And that doesn't not have value. But you have to think wisely about those special events. So the board's role in fundraising is to find donors and to develop those donors, because that donor who may give you a $2,000 check today may give you a $120,000 check later if that relationship is nurtured and that donor is developed. And one of the things boards will often say when you recruit members is like, well, I don't want to have to ask anybody for money. Then you're not appropriate to be on the board because everybody's got to ask for money. That's how nonprofits survive. I told people when I started out as an executive director, I'd be like, oh, I'm an executive director. And then in my later years, I said, no, I'm a professional beggar. That's what I am. I need money to keep the doors open, to keep services going. So the first rule of fundraising is somebody has to ask somebody else for the money. Now, you may have a board member who's better at that than another. That's fine. Then definitely you want to use their talent, skills, and connections to do that. But everybody has to be willing to sell a ticket or ask their neighbor for, a $20 donation. But everybody's got to be comfortable asking for money. And everybody on that board has to make a financial gift. And I know this can be a controversial thing to say, but again, funding agencies now are saying, has every single person on your board made a financial gift? Not a donation of time, but a financial gift. And that's why I'm saying in your board job description, if it isn't clear that there's an expectation that everybody gives a gift, you need to put that in there. And you can say, It's a minimum gift of $25 a year, whatever you need that to be. But you need to be able to say to that potential donor, yes, 100% of my board gave a financial gift.
Yeah, those are two questions I see commonly on grant applications. And they're the two questions that I cringe the most about, because again, luckily it doesn't ask how much each board member has given, but the question is always, has 100% of your board of directors given a contribution this year or last year or whatever they're looking at? And the second question that is on a lot of applications, and we saw this with some of the state funding, what is the diversity of your board?
Absolutely.
Those are the two questions that I've seen a lot within the past year. Sometimes they're the hardest to answer. I know Laura has a question about tips on finding and applying for grants, and I'll piggyback on that real quick before we answer it. Keep in mind, this is what the Southern Illinois Community Foundation does. So we've just worked with over 80 nonprofits, and if you're having to look for an executive director, it may be worth a call to us to say, hey, have you heard any buzz within the nonprofit world? Is anybody kind of looking, or anything like that? But more importantly, the Nonprofit Network Leadership Institute is going to be a great place to find board members, because that's what we're going to do. We're going to train your board members to know all of these things, so that when you reach out to us and say, we're looking for someone to be on our board, and maybe has, whatever experience or whatever background, we can provide that to you. So don't forget that we are a very valuable resource. Use that resource as much as you want. The other thing I will say is, as far as grants, we have granted for last year, we granted over $1 million to Southern Illinois. So when you're looking for grants, use this as a resource. Check our Facebook page. Check our website. We have the Healing Illinois grants on our website. So if you're looking for grants, don't forget that we're here to help you as much as we can. We support charitable giving. We support nonprofits. That's what a community foundation does. So talk to me, talk to Byram. Reba's doing the Healing Illinois grant. There's lots of opportunities. So that's my little spiel for right now. But Laura does have the question, do you have any tips on finding and applying for grants?
Tips on what?
Finding and applying for grants.
Oh, yeah, I'm going to go back to the same thing. What is your mission and what is your vision statement and what is your long range plan? I'll just give the example of, coming here to Logan and working in the grants office, when they were hiring a grant person, the first thing I said to them in the interview is, tell me your mission statement, your vision statement, and what is your long range plan? Because otherwise what starts happening in the grant world is you just go out there looking around like, well, hey, look, here's a grant for pink flowers. So if they're giving $50,000 for pink flowers, let's get some pink flowers. Okay, well, it has nothing to do with your mission and your vision statement. So you're like a ping pong ball. You're just following the money. You're not following your mission and your vision statement. So my key to looking for and securing grants is, first of all, start looking in the right place for the right thing, the thing that supports your activities. Now, there are search engines out there and websites and things that you can look to and organizations you can join to look at grants. It's a full-time job. Just doing grant research is a full-time job. So I would say if the Southern Illinois Foundation is able to help you with that, I would use that resource, because literally in any given day, I could sit here for 8 straight hours and be on all kinds of sites just researching grants, federal, state, local. So stay focused on what you're trying to do and then go look for grants that meet that focus.
I'll kind of add to that, Tammy. So another thing, as part of some of the things that we're doing here at the Community Foundation, sometimes we're the first to know about grant opportunities for Southern Illinois, because we will have organizations who will reach out to us and tell us about a grant opportunity, particularly if they've put out an RFP and they didn't get many applications, then they might reach out to us and say, hey, this is what we're doing. Do you have anybody in mind, or can you be a subcontractor for this grant? Can you re-grant for us? Things like that. So I would just encourage you to make sure you stay up to date with us on some of those things. Also, I would add that again, we see a lot of opportunities And part of this nonprofit network, we have some future sessions that I'm trying to line out right now that deal with ways that nonprofits can do government grants. So if you're looking to do your SAM registration and to look at some of those opportunities, which is something that Tammy kind of led us to somebody to help with that. We're going to have information on that, information on grant writing. We've got some sessions coming up on diversity and inclusion. So lots of information. So just be on the watch for that. We do have one more question, and this is for Tammy. The question is, do you recommend that the gift by board members be set as high as the market will allow? For example, some say the members must donate $500,000 to get a seat on the board.
Well,
and that question's in the chat, Tammy. If you need to look at it, it's in the chat.
Well, again, I'm going to go back to, and I keep saying this, so I hope you guys are clear when you leave this meeting. Everything has to get tied back to your mission, your vision, and your long-range plan, and what your clear expectations are of a board. It can go either way. It can be a thing where there is a high amount that is set, which means you're only going to attract in a certain type of person to sit on that board, which may then preclude some of your diversity. Okay, so you have to keep that in mind. I'm more inclined to say we expect every board member to personally give a, say, $100 gift a year, but we expect them to bring in another $4,000 or whatever that is, so that they are responsible for going around and helping bring in additional dollars. I'm more inclined to follow that, but I suppose if I was sitting in Miami Beach and I'm sitting in Heron, those are two different conversations I'm going to have about a board and what that dollar amount should look like. So hopefully that answers that question. But Michelle, before we leave, there's a couple of things I want to go back and just touch on real quickly. I want to go back and talk about that search for an executive director, because I'm also very passionate about this. And I will say this, you get what you pay for. And one of the things that I feel very strongly about is executive directors are often looked at like, priests or nuns, or that, we were supposed to take a vow of poverty in order to work for a nonprofit. And that's not fair. You have executive directors who are highly educated, highly skilled, work endless hours, and somebody says, well, I can pay you $36,000 a year. In the world we live in now, those individuals are going to go work for for-profit companies because the skills they have around knowing how to work with diverse cultures, knowing how to listen, they're going to take all those skills somewhere where they're going to get paid for those skills. So you really have to think about paying them adequately and getting what you pay for. That's true in any field. And I really see that happening more so in this field. I see a lot of executive directors walking away and saying, I'm not respected. Like, people don't respect what I do and they don't pay me accordingly for my knowledge and skills. So that I just want to touch on a little bit. And the grant question about where to look for grants and things, I wanted just to add, sometimes the best place to look for that is in collaboration with other nonprofits, to partner with somebody who has a strong funding track record and start building on their track record. Start learning from them how they're doing it or what their funding sources are, and they will bring you along. So go look for partners and collaborate with them and look for funding that way instead of you on your own trying to attract a donor. Grants are very competitive. They're very competitive. And if you go in yourself as, again, we serve 200, kids a year meals. That's great. That is a wonderful thing. But you're competing with 10,000 other organizations who are trying to get that money, who have a longer history, a more solid track record. So go partner with them, because they may be looking for, and I do this all the time at the college. I look for some of the colleges in the northern part of the state and say, well, could we put a package together to this donor where maybe they're used to funding the Chicago area, but they'd like to use us as a pilot project of how that would work in a rural community. It's like, oh yeah, okay. So now we got our foot in the door with that donor. So those are other good ways to look at grant funding. Don't try to get it on your own. Go find somebody who's done it successfully and partner with them.
Hey, Tammy, I want to add a few things too. You really cracked me up with the vow of poverty to be an executive director. That's hilarious. We don't need to invite our board members to that discussion, right? But I do think too, I want to add to what you were talking about on board recruitment. And, you know, I mean, we have diversity and you know, traditionally, if you look at all boards throughout Southern Illinois, they're going to be very white. You know, that's the reality. And so if you look over the last 10 or 15 years, what diversity meant is, did you have male and female? Well, that's not enough. But it's also ethnic. You know, we need diversity. You need people of color so that you have a different perspective. I think you also have to have the age difference. If you look at my board, I won't call them out on that, but my board is not, our average age would be quite a way it's up there. So, you know, and it is very strange. And even if I just went back 5 years as a board member myself and thought about what would happen if you brought a college student onto your board, like, right. Oh, I don't know how we do that. What could a college student say? That's the whole point. A college student can bring such a different perspective to what your agency is doing. They are not going to be able to contribute $500,000 or, you know, even $1,000, because if they're a college student, you know, it might be a $20 donation as a board member. And that's okay. You know, the perspective that they're going to bring is completely different than everyone else on our board. And the same thing, you know, with bringing people of color or people of other types of minorities onto your board. You can't let that money get in the way of bringing the diversity of thought. And the other thing is, we've looked at a few nonprofits lately that have come to us that are just starting up, and all of their board members were of the same profession. And I don't want to necessarily call anyone out, but they were a very social work heavy nonprofit, and all of their board members were social workers. There's no diversity of thought. You know, not all social workers think exactly the same way, but social workers think like they were trained to be social workers. So diversity and, you know, just the different professions that are represented, or, you know, a homemaker, or some, you know, someone who stayed a single mom or whatever, all of those diversities matter. Diversity is such a word that has almost had a singular focus, and instead it should have, you know, there's 10 different factors in diversity maybe, or more. I don't know what they are, but they're important for that board. They're important for your clientele. They're important for your staff as well. So anyhow, that's just my.
I'm going to interrupt you for just a second. It is just a few minutes past noon. So if you need to jump off the call, our next call is going to be on February 18th. You'll get probably an invitation from me of some sort when I've wrapped up what I think it's going to be. I just need to confirm that with our speaker. So if you need to go, feel free to do that. I'm going to leave the call open. We're going to stay here. So if you have other questions, or you just want to, you know, talk through some of these things, feel free to stay and join us. But again, we are past the time. So if you do need to go, thank you so much for joining us. And we hope you found the information that Tammy provided useful. And we will be also recording this. So if it is something that you need, that you didn't get to see the full Zoom call on, we can provide that as well. So again, thank you so much for joining us. And if you're going to stay, please feel free to do so. We'll continue the conversation among those that are staying. Ralph, I think, there you go. Not unmuted yet. Ralph, if you can hear me, I sent you a request to unmute. You should just have to push the button.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Wonderful. Well, I wanted to thank you again for allowing me to participate. We just went through the executive director hiring position back last fall. I think Byron knows that, with great success. We have some wonderful outlets to share with anyone looking for the executive director. For those of you that don't know me, I'm the chairman of the board of Franklin Williamson Child Advocacy in Heron. I've been on the board for about 12 years, and I've served on many, many boards over the course of my years. I've been chairman of this board for about 5. And going through the ED process after having the executive director with us approximately, well, over 25 years, it was new to us too. So we went through the process, and we have many, many outlets and ideas to share if, in fact, you want to partake in that. So Byram knows how to get a hold of me. And I'll just end it on that and say, everybody have a great day.
No, absolutely, Ralph. We want to be able to share that knowledge, because there's a lot of nonprofits there. You said 25 years of having a director, and it's common throughout the state. We had someone who did a study last year statewide, and we didn't get to present that because of COVID. But what they found is it's in the high 90s as far as nonprofits in Illinois that have zero succession planning. It's an ED. Tammy said devour poverty, but it's actually a life sentence. And if you retire, then your board or your other volunteers are going to say, well, if you retire, the agency just dies. Well, that's not a fair pressure to put on someone. And because things happen, car accidents happen, other things, that if you don't have that succession planning, then you do what you just did, and you try to replace someone after 25 years that just did and knew everything, and now you've got to start over. It's kind of unfair for your new person, right? They have to replace someone that knew everything. And
it can be. We've got a nice succession package. We've got our search package and so forth. Again, we were bombarded with applicants, finally narrowing it down to approximately 5 for interview. And then finally getting to our goal. So it was about a 2-month process, which was quicker than I had anticipated, but we were on a time schedule. But we did not lessen the quality of our executive director just because of our timetable.
Right.
We were very fortunate. So again, I'm willing to share with anyone who's willing to listen. I can refer you to my executive director who has all that information. As a matter of fact, she would be more than probably happy to sit down with you and say, well, this is what I found attractive. This is what, and so forth, and go through the process with you as she just went through it.
Yeah, absolutely. Appreciate it.
Ralph, if I can piggyback onto that just a moment, I mean, the CAC world is something in the last 25, 30 years has really evolved into sort of an industry unto itself, coming out of Huntsville, Alabama originally. But what starts happening, and sometimes the benefit of that is there are people out there who are looking for an executive director job in a CAC setting because they know what they're up against and what that means, because it's a very unique field and it's a very tough field to be in. So one of the advantages is you have people coming into that who really understand what that world looks like. But when you've had an executive director who was there long term, that new person coming in has some challenges because they are up against this icon, if you will, who was there, and they'll never be that person, and they'll never be able to be that person, and nor should they. So you knew this, I can tell already, Ralph. You guys knew that you couldn't compare that person to the former person. You have to let them set their own pace and set their own create their own role there.
We certainly did, but then again, there were some baseline qualities that we were looking for.
Absolutely.
That you can build off of. So you are exactly correct about that. Again, willing to share, and I've left my phone number on the timeline if you want to call me. Okay.
Good.
Thank you, Ralph.
Thanks, everybody. See ya.
Thank you. Does anybody have any other questions of me, or if I can be of further assistance, you're welcome to reach out to me or through Michelle.
I would just say, and not directly to Joni, but just as a blanket statement, the organizations that I've worked for as executive director, program manager, the benefits have been that they've offered so much flexibility. And so I've appreciated that what you don't offer in pay, you can offer in flexibility. So for some people, and at the time there was a time in my life just months ago, up until the last 2 weeks, that was much more important for me than the actual financial compensation for it. So for some people who are in an executive director role, if they're looking for something that's part-time or looking for something that offers flexibility, sometimes what I would say is you have to think outside the box. Executive directors are not in it to be millionaires. We're in it for so much more. And so sometimes it is those out of the box things that organizations can offer that become important above and beyond that compensation, particularly if it's something that's part-time or full-time that you can give a lot of flexibility on. So just my 2 cents. So Tammy, again, thank you. I really appreciate it. You're such a gem and you're a wealth of knowledge, and definitely glad that you're able to join us for this call and that you're in Southern Illinois. And I know you help your own passions and nonprofits. And so being able to do this call was wonderful. So thank you.
Thank you. And thank you all.
All right.
And again, whatever you all are doing, thank you, because whatever it was hard before COVID. It has quadrupled during COVID. And someday I hope we all get to forget what the word COVID meant and that we can just move on. Our clients so desperately are in need of all of us right now. And thank you all, literally from the bottom of my heart. I've been there. I know what you're up against, and thank you for just everything you've done to rise above this.
All right, everyone, have a great day. We'll see you next month.
Thank you.
See ya.